Hi class, I hope you are having a lovely day. This is Dr. Grace and this is a quick video to talk you through components of a health education lesson plan. This is a template that is found on the Tennessee Tech.edu website and I will share the link in Blackboard. You don't have to use every component of this lesson plan, but this does give you a good foundation for what should be included, and it has descriptions in the different blocks that tell you what should be there. So if you were to use this template, you would want to delete out the unnecessary text, basically everything that's in red, but ensure that you're including that information specific to your program. So, what's included in this lesson plan? First, you want to have just your general information. Put the title of your program at the top. What is the lesson specific title? So you might have, for example, the diabetes prevention program. That's the overall program, but then lesson 2 focuses on physical activity. So include that information there. You want to just give information about, when you're hosting this, who your target audience is. So in this case, this is for a school setting, but you could change this to be more specific to your target audience. If this is indeed something that's being delivered in a school setting, you may have national or state curriculum standards that have to be included for this to meet the school and the state's criteria and expectations. So if that is the case, you would want to put that information here. You want to have that there so that you can make sure that you're meeting those standards. If this is something that you're doing outside of an educational setting, that may not be necessary. You want to have your overall goal of the program. So what are you planning on doing? What is the end goal that you want the students to learn or the participants? And you want to have that clearly articulated, because as you're developing your lesson plan, you can refer back to your overall goal. You can also double check it against your curriculum standards to make sure that you're meeting those standards, if again, standards are required for your lesson. So you want to include what are your lesson objectives, and as we discussed in a previous video, have those be your SMART objectives. So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time capped. So you may have one, you may have more than one, but you want to basically have your objective state by the end of this lesson, learners will be able to, and then include that objective or objectives. You then want to have an area where if you're introducing new vocabulary or content in this specific lesson, include that here so that you can define that, so that you are ensuring that everybody participating in this lesson is on the same page and they have the same vocabulary. You're all talking the same language. If you are working in an academic setting, so you might want to consider how you are putting your words together to make phrases and sentences in written language, or how you're going to communicate. Is this written? Is this oral? Are you having conversations, etc.? That may not be something you need to be concerned about, but just another thing that you can think through. Evaluation is important. So as you start planning your program and then your curriculum and your different lessons and activities, you want to know how you're going to evaluate that. So hopefully you have already thought about how you're going to look at that. And the easy thing to do would be to pull that from the plan you've already developed. If by chance you don't have an evaluation plan already set up, this is where you would think through what you would collect related to data to determine whether or not you're meeting your lesson objectives. So how are you going to determine if your program was indeed effective? If you are looking at something related to physical activity, you need to measure physical activity. If you're looking at something like a change in knowledge related to the dangers of vaping and e-cigarettes, that should be the content of your course. So these areas will tell you what you're going to evaluate based on your lesson specifically and how. You then are going to figure out what activities you're going to do related to your lesson so that you can plan what you're going to be doing during the time that you have with your participants. You can have a template that you can break it apart into a table. It might be a little bit easier to refer to it this way, but have your objectives. So if you have 3 objectives for the lesson, you have 1, 2, and 3. Figure out, do you have 60 minutes? Are you going to spend about 15 minutes on each objective with some time at the beginning of the session to introduce what you're doing and some time at the end for questions and to sum up what you did? Have a description of what you're going to be covering during that part of the course related to your objective. And then how can you do some just ongoing assessment to make sure that they're understanding what you're presenting to them. Describe briefly how this lesson plan will progress. So do you have enough information where you can teach the lesson as you have it planned? Do you need additional materials? Do you have handouts or things that you would need to provide that could have your definitions or your content? So how is this going to progress? You want to think about questions and or activities for higher order thinking. So not just giving them information to understand, but what can they do that will get them to fully understand what you're presenting and think about it, and analyze something, to evaluate something. And then you want to determine what your closure is and how you're going to summarize the lesson or learning of the day. So revisit the main points. So as you're in this section, you would want to revisit the main points for each objective and summarize that at the end. You want to make sure that they are understanding and then introduce what you're going to cover in the next lecture. List all of the resources you need for your lesson plan, and you could get as detailed as chalk for the chalkboard, dry erase markers, handouts, everything like that. Are there any adaptations you need for individuals with any sort of disabilities or anything like that? Hopefully you will know that information about your participants at the beginning, but if not, well, you should know that information about at the beginning. You should have that so you know of any disability someone might have. If they are visually impaired, if they're hearing impaired, they would have to have somebody come in to help with their specific accommodation. So if this is in an educational setting, there should be some sort of communication from the guidance counselor, the disability support services, that would provide you a document that says student so-and-so is eligible for this accommodation, and then you would work to provide that for them. If this is in a community setting, it might be a little bit different, but you may not know that from the get-go. But as you get to know your participants, that's when you can ensure that you do absolutely have adaptations to make sure that you're meeting the needs of your participants. So you want to think about how you're going to manage the course time that you have. So think about what you'll do if nobody wants to respond to your questions, or conversely, what do you do if one person dominates the whole time? What do you do if you start running out of time with a certain area? How do you pivot and move on to that next objective? So you want to think about how you can manage these things. You also want to think about safety. So if you're hosting a health education event in a community setting, do you know the emergency evacuation route? Do you know where the fire extinguisher or the AED are? So those are things you want to think about. And then making sure that your curriculum is evidence-based, ensure that you do have, your sources that you can refer to. That way, if someone has a question that is more specific than the information that you presented, you yourself can refer back to that. I wouldn't necessarily give academic sources to anyone, or not anyone, everyone. Different types of populations might have different levels of health literacy, numeracy, things like that. So you might have to be the one to translate what those documents are saying, but this at least gives you a quick access point to the sources you used. And then it also lets you make sure that you're using reputable sources and evidence-based sources. And then after you have your lesson, think about how it went. Think about what worked well. Think about what didn't work well. What are things that you could do to make sure that your program is run as best as possible? This also can be something that can be communicated to other members of your team. So if they know that there's, potential for conflict depending on your topic, or there was an emergency, or if just nobody is engaging, what are things that you could brainstorm with them, that you could communicate to them so that you can try to make this a better session moving forward? So again, this is from Tennessee Tech University. I will share the link in Blackboard. And if you have questions about this lesson plan, and again, this is just one example of what a lesson plan should look like, but if you have questions, please post them up to Blackboard and I will answer them there. You all have a wonderful day. Thank you.